All right, welcome to this episode of Leaning into Discomfort. I'm Chris Waddell, class of 1991, and I'm joined by Kelly Brush. Kelly, what class were you?
I was class of Middlebury 2008, so a little bit after you.
One of the things that's interesting for us is that we had such a similar path in some ways, in that we were both on the ski team. I had a skiing accident in 1988 and ended up in a wheelchair as a result. And you had a skiing accident
In 2006 and ended up in a wheelchair as a result. So it's really interesting. We have really similar stories. I didn't know you at all before I got hurt, but because of our connections, we obviously got connected pretty quickly after I had my accident. And it's been really fun to get to know each other over the years and sort of follow similar but different paths too.
When I came back to school, I was the only person in a wheelchair. I didn't really know anything. I was straight out of the hospital, but I was put into a position where I was educating a whole lot of people. And it's like, do I need to push you up this hill? Can I open the door for you? This kind of stuff. What do you need? And I was trying to figure out what I needed, but at the same time, you were probably going through that, but then you were also elevated to this status through the foundation. What was that like? You were speaking for a lot of people and representing a lot of people.
Well, that's the interesting thing about disabilities generally, is we end up being representative for a big group of people, whether or not we want to be, right? You see one person with a disability who needs or wants one set of help, and a lot of people assume that's what everybody needs. And that's not necessarily the case, right? We're so individual and everybody needs and wants different things. And so it's really tricky to sort of be that voice for everyone. It definitely was sort of a role that was kind of thrust on me, as it is with anybody who develops a disability, or who has a disability, I guess. And you can either embrace it or not. And I've just sort of decided to embrace it. It's just kind of like, okay, here are the things that I need and here are the things that I see. And I'm happy to talk about that with anybody, and try to educate people, because I feel like education for anybody is going to be the most important thing that's going to help not only me, but everybody else in this community too. And, hopefully provide a little bit more normalcy around disabilities and what's different and what's not.
For me, what I try to do is I actually try to steer it more to the human kind of experience, in that, we're all going to struggle. It's kind of the nature of it. And our struggling is generally what determines our success, or what determines our happiness in a lot of ways, is our ability to sort of struggle through the day or make the most of those struggles. And our struggle is more visible, but not necessarily all that much different. We're in a group where somebody comes up and says, well, what happened to you? How do you react to that? Or what's the sensation when that happens?
Oh my gosh, you're so right. And it happens all the time. And people, you see it go both ways, right? Where, like, on the one hand, people like want to ignore it and pretend like there's nothing different. And on the other hand, you have the people who say, like, what happened, right? And actually, so I work as a pediatric nurse practitioner. So I see kids all day long, and I walk into an exam room and, if they haven't met me before, they look at my wheelchair and they're like, what happened to you? It's actually like really endearing when it comes from kids too, because they're just wondering about like why I have this wheelchair, which would be the same thing as if they were wondering if I why I have brown hair, right? So it's just they're seeing something different. And for me, especially with kids, I try to be as matter of fact as I can, right? I hurt my back a long time ago. Now my legs don't work as well, so I use my wheelchair to get around. It's like my standard kind of thing. And when adults ask, I try to do the same thing. I talk about it as matter of fact, and this is what it is. And if they have questions, I'm happy to answer them. And I always sort of feel like the more we can talk about it, the more it's out there, the easier it is to talk about. So while, on the one hand, coming up to somebody and saying, like, what happened to you seems a little like crass. But I really do think that opening that conversation is actually an okay thing. And I think it's an important thing too. And to your point before, everybody has those struggles. Ours are just a little bit more obvious, which makes it easier to talk about in a lot of ways.
And I think that part of it, as you said, is opening the conversation. People want to start that conversation. And it's often like the thing that's front of mind is the most obvious thing. And so even though, I mean, I know I've been in this situation where I've said, don't ask that question, don't ask that question, it's looping around in my brain. And that's the question that I ask. But that's the entry into the conversation. And I think that people genuinely are interested. And there was a time that I was at the gym, and it was a Sunday in the middle of the winter, and nobody was there except for this one other woman, and she was a bilateral amputee. So she had 2 carbon fiber legs. I happened to be reading a book about a mountain climber who had lost his legs because he got caught in a storm. And I kept thinking, I wonder if she lost her legs because she got caught on a mountain. And I didn't ask her that question. I just didn't say anything. And oftentimes you just don't say anything. And she walked by me and said, oh, that's a lot of weight. And I was like, huh, you mean starting a conversation can be that easy? Can be exactly the thing that we're sharing right now. The assumption sometimes is that you're in a wheelchair. So how can I help you? Mm-hmm. And how do you react to assistance?
When somebody asks me if I need help, say I'm getting out of my car or, going into opening a door or whatever, more often than not, I don't. And I usually, say no thanks, but, thanks for offering. But the thing that I always feel is I always actually feel really grateful when people offer help, because it's a lot easier for me to accept help when it's offered than for me to ask for help. And I'm actually really comfortable saying, no, thank you, I'm good. And I hope people are okay hearing that. But I do think it's really helpful and important for people to offer that help, because the more people offer help, the more we can talk about it, the more normal it is, the more it becomes normalized, and the more the conversation opens up. Just like, if you see something you think you want to ask that question, maybe you shouldn't ask that question, but then you ask something that's really simple and like, hey, we're all skiing together. Hey, how was your last run? And sure, I'm skiing in a mono ski, but we are all taking runs together, And so it's that common ground that sometimes can be really nice to sort of open the door and open that conversation, and ask for help. How is it for you when you're doing something that you really don't want help with or don't need help with, and somebody really wants to help?
A few years ago, I had a little sort of training camp with a bunch of guys that I'd raced with. And they told me one night at dinner, they said, the next time you're at the supermarket and somebody asks you if they can put your chair in the car, you have to say yes. And it's been a couple of years. I still haven't done it. I've had a couple of people ask me. But the funny part about that is that it actually in some ways is more difficult to accept, because your chair needs to be in the right place, because you're going to get to the next spot and you need to be able to grab your chair and pull it out and put the wheels on and do all of those things. And so it's a funny deal, because yes, I agree with you 100% that it's great that people ask if they can help. I think that's it's a great trait of being a human being, right? Is this sense of, I'm here to help you, love to help you, just fellow human being. And that is absolutely awesome. At your point, no, thank you is a perfectly valid answer, but it also sometimes there is this sense of allowing people to help us, which creates a bit of interaction as well, right? That's some of the interesting part is that if we do everything by ourselves, we don't necessarily have to interact with someone. But if we get assistance, then we're actually interacting. And in some ways, the funny part is that you're actually giving a gift to someone else. They're helping you, but you're giving them the gift of being generous. And So it's a funny deal. And I think that it is a challenge, and trying to figure out how can I help you best? And that having a good answer is a hard one.
Yeah. It is a hard one because it isn't always an easy answer sometimes, right? And you don't always want to, you don't know what to say necessarily.
You don't know what to say on assistance. And it's also it's balancing the scale in some ways too, right? Because it's like you need assistance, but then on the other side, you're seen as an inspiration. How do you balance the two of those?
Well, and the inspiration, comments and conversation is really interesting because this is a debate that's gone on a lot in the disability community, where people say, like, don't call me an inspiration, I'm just living my life. And that's true in a lot of ways, right? Like somebody else, some other 2008 Middlebury grad who is a mom of two kids and working full time is probably not somebody who would necessarily be called an inspiration. And yet I am, because I'm in a wheelchair. I also sort of feel like, you know what? The more people see what I'm doing, and if they think that's cool, I'm okay with that. I think it's okay to say that that's inspiring, or that they sort of look at things differently when they see the way that, I'm able to do things or not. I sort of feel like being an inspiration is okay. Being pitied, I don't want to hear, right? I don't want to say, like, oh, that's too bad, I'm really sorry. I'm like, man, it's okay. I'm okay. My life is okay. And like my life is pretty great, actually.
We need inspiration. Like I did a bike ride a few years ago, and it was called the Who's Your Hero Tour. And we would ask people, who's your hero? And I was amazed at how many people said, let me think about that. Let me get back to you on that. Because I feel like I acquire heroes everywhere I go. I mean, you're saying that if you hadn't had your injury, that you wouldn't be an inspiration, but you're passionate about your job, you're passionate about your kids, you're passionate about your husband. I mean, it's like that to me is really inspirational. Like that's I mean, you might say, oh no, I'm not, I'm just normal. And it's like, in some ways, yes, but in other ways, no. I think that we need that inspiration. The challenge is that it can be surface level. It's, oh, you're so inspirational. And am I inspirational because I'm in a wheelchair and I showed up? Or am I inspirational based on the things that I do? I'd much rather be inspirational about what I'm doing. Well, Kelly, thank you so much. This is awesome for us to be a part of this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this is wonderful. Thanks for talking about all of this. And thank all of you guys for tuning into this latest episode of Leaning into Discomfort.